"This is going to blow your mind." Whispers beneath the floorboards. In the dead of night, when the world is silent, the whispers begin, soft, almost imperceptible. They weave tales of forgotten secrets and hidden fears. Do you dare to listen? The wind screamed through the forest, slapping against the crumbling facade of the Blackthorn Manor. The night was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Evie tightened her scarf as she stepped out of her car, staring up at the decrepit house her late uncle had left her. A sense of dread washed over her. Its windows glared back, dark and lifeless, like empty sockets in a skull. She felt as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. The door creaked open before she could touch it, as though the house had been expecting her. A chill ran down her spine. The air inside was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and something faintly metallic. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of her vision. Her boots echoed on the warped wooden floor, the sound swallowed quickly by the oppressive silence. Each step felt like a journey into the unknown. As Evie moved deeper into the house, she became aware of a faint noise beneath the quiet. It was almost imperceptible, yet it sent shivers through her. At first she thought it was the wind, but no, this was different. It was whispering. The sound was eerie, like a distant ghostly chant. Faint, disjointed syllables rising and falling, as though someone were muttering right below her feet. Her heart pounded in her chest. She froze, the hair on the back of her neck prickling. "Hello," she called. Her voice echoed back, swallowed by the darkness. Her voice sounded small, frail. The whispering stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she forced herself to continue exploring. Every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning. She found the source of the noise in the sitting room. Her pulse quickened as she approached. The ornate rug in the center of the floor was strangely out of place, its edges curling as if it had been hastily dragged there. Beneath it, a trap door. She hesitated, feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Evie hesitated, her hand trembling as she gripped the iron ring embedded in the trap door. The cold metal felt like ice against her skin. A chill radiated from the floorboards, seeping into her bones, making her breath fog in the frigid air. She pulled it open, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling into an abyss of darkness. "Don't," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. But her legs moved anyway, as though some unseen force were pulling her downward into the void. The stairs groaned under her weight, each creak echoing ominously, and the air grew colder with each step. The cellar was vast, much larger than she'd imagined, its darkness swallowing the weak beam of her flashlight. The walls were lined with shelves, but instead of wine or preserves they held strange objects. Antique dolls with cracked faces and hollow eyes, jars of murky liquid containing unidentifiable shapes that seemed to writhe when she looked away, and faded photographs of people who seemed to be staring directly at her, their expressions blank and lifeless, as if they were trapped within the frames. In the center of the room was a wooden table, its surface gouged with deep scratches, as if something had tried to claw its way out. On it lay an old phonograph, its needle poised over a warped record, waiting to play a forgotten tune. As she approached, the record began to spin on its own, the needle scratching across the surface. A voice crackled to life, low and guttural. "She's here," it hissed, sending a shiver down her spine. Evie staggered back, her heart hammering in her chest like a drum. The whispering returned, louder this time, surrounding her like a suffocating fog. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from the very air, as if the house itself were alive. She spun around, her flashlight trembling in her grip, casting erratic shadows. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice breaking. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence. And then she saw it, a shadow, impossibly long and thin, slithering along the far wall like a serpent. It moved with unnatural grace, folding in on itself, elongating, reshaping, as if it were alive. "Evie," the shadow crooned, its voice echoing in her mind, filling her with a dread she couldn't escape. Panicking, Evie scrambled back up the stairs, slamming the trapdoor shut with a resounding thud. She frantically shoved the rug over it and dashed to the front door, but it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard she pulled. The whispering began again, louder now, almost a chant echoing through the house like a sinister hymn. She turned to find the walls of the house shifting, twisting as if alive, the very structure of the house betraying her. The wallpaper curled and peeled away, revealing what lay beneath, hundreds of eyes blinking and swiveling to focus on her with an unnerving intensity. The floor beneath her feet rippled like water, and she stumbled, falling hard onto her knees, the impact jarring her bones. The shadow emerged from the ceiling this time, unfurling like smoke, its presence suffocating and oppressive. Its form solidified, revealing a figure cloaked in tattered fabric that seemed to writhe and squirm, as if alive, the very air around it crackling with malevolence. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a void, an abyss that seemed to pull at her very soul, a darkness that threatened to consume her. "You shouldn't have come," it said, though its voice was in her head rather than her ears, each word a dagger of dread. "What do you want?" Evie whispered, tears streaming down her face, her voice trembling with fear. It tilted its head, the abyss where its face should be narrowing, as if considering her very essence. You belong to us now," it declared, the words reverberating through her mind like a death knell. The floor cracked open beneath her, revealing a cavernous pit filled with twisting roots and writhing bodies, a nightmarish abyss. Hands, too many hands, reached up, clawing at her legs, dragging her downward as she screamed, her cries echoing in the void. The shadow figure loomed over her, its tattered cloak spreading wide, enveloping her in an all-consuming darkness. Her last coherent thought was that the whispering had never stopped, a relentless torment. It was inside her now, burrowing deep, carving its words into her mind, an eternal echo of despair. When the police arrived weeks later, all they found was an empty house. The furniture was gone, the walls bare, the air thick with an unsettling silence. But in the centre of the sitting room, etched into the floorboards, were two haunting words. "She's here, our gap to S." The house stood silent, yet the whispers persisted. Neighbours reported strange occurrences, lights flickering in the dead of night, shadows moving in the windows, and an eerie melody that seemed to float through the air. Gap to S. Months passed, and the once vibrant neighbourhood fell into silence and decay. The house, now a local legend, drew the curious and the brave. But those who dared to enter never stayed long. They spoke of a presence, a chilling cold that seeped into their bones, and a voice that whispered their darkest fears. Gap 3S. One night, a young woman driven by a fascination with the paranormal decided to investigate. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a camera, she stepped over the threshold. The air was thick with tension, each creak of the floorboards echoing like a drumbeat in her ears. Gap 2S. She made her way to the cellar, the place where it had all begun. As she descended the stairs, her flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. She could feel it. Something was watching her, waiting. Gap 2S. In the centre of the cellar, she found an old, dust-covered mirror. As she wiped away the grime, her reflection stared back at her. But there was something wrong. The eyes. Those weren't her eyes. They were dark, hollow, filled with an ancient sorrow. And then the reflection smiled. Gap 2S. The camera captured everything. The moment she screamed, the instant she turned to run, and the final shot of the mirror now shattered with the words, "She's here," scrawled in the dust. Gap 2S. The footage was found days later, but the young woman was never seen again. The house remains a silent sentinel guarding its secrets, and the whispers continue. Some say if you listen closely you can hear her voice calling out from the darkness. Gap 3. Cess. And so the legend grows, feeding on the fears of those who dare to remember. The house waits, patient and eternal, for its next visitor. Gap 2S. Because she's here, and she's never leaving. Gap 2S. The legend of the haunted house spread far and wide, becoming a topic of fascination for paranormal enthusiasts and thrill-seekers alike. But what no one knew was that the house had another secret, an unseen witness to all the terror. Gap 2S. Hidden in the attic, behind a wall of old boxes and forgotten memories, lay a small, dusty journal. Its pages were filled with the scribbled accounts of someone who had lived in the house decades ago, a child whose presence had been erased from history. Gap 3S. One stormy evening, a group of paranormal investigators decided to spend the night in the house, determined to uncover the truth. As they set up their equipment, one of them stumbled upon the hidden attic entrance. Curiosity piqued, they climbed the rickety ladder and discovered the journal, Gap 2S. The entries were chilling, recounting events that mirrored the current hauntings. The child wrote of shadows that whispered, a mirror that showed things it shouldn't, and a voice that called out from the cellar. But the most disturbing entry was the last one, written in a trembling hand. She's here, she's always been here, watching, waiting. Gap 2S. As the investigators read the final words, a cold wind swept through the attic, extinguishing their flashlights. The air grew thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of a child's laughter echoing from the walls. Gap 2S. Panicked, they tried to leave, but the attic door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The laughter grew louder, more sinister, and the temperature dropped to a bone-chilling cold. One by one, the investigators felt a presence behind them, breathing down their necks, unseen but undeniably there. Gap 3S. In a desperate bid for escape, they broke through the attic window and fled, leaving their equipment and the journal behind. The footage they captured revealed nothing but darkness and the haunting sound of that eerie laughter. Gap 2S. The house stands as it always has, a monument to untold horrors. The journal remains hidden, its secrets waiting to be uncovered by the next unfortunate soul. And the whispers continue, more insistent than ever, for she's here, watching, waiting, and now she's not alone. Gap 3S. As the legend grows, so does the house's hunger for new victims. It waits, patient and eternal, for the next visitor who dares to uncover its secrets. Because once you enter, you're never truly alone. She's always watching. Gap 2S. Long before the house gained its sinister reputation, it was the home of a revered family, the Everwoods. Known for their wealth and influence, the Everwoods were a picture of perfection from the outside, but hidden behind their grandeur was a dark secret. A pact made with a malevolent entity. Gap 2S. It all began with the patriarch, Jonathan Everwood, who was desperate to save his ailing daughter, Eliza. In his desperation, he sought out a mysterious figure known only as the Whisperer, who promised to cure Eliza in exchange for a binding agreement. The terms were simple but terrifying: eternal servitude to the entity bound to the house. Gap 3S. Eliza was cured, but the price was steep. The house became a vessel for the entity, feeding off the fear and despair of its inhabitants. Jonathan, bound by his pact, watched helplessly as the house claimed victim after victim, each disappearance shrouded in mystery. Gap 2S. The journal in the attic belonged to Eliza, who documented the horrors she witnessed as the entity grew stronger. She wrote of shadowy figures that lurked in the corners, disembodied voices that whispered her name, and a mirror that reflected a twisted version of reality. But her entries grew darker as she realized the entity's true nature. Gap 3S. The final entry, written in her own blood, revealed the ultimate horror. The Whisperer is part of me now. I am the Watcher, the warden of this cursed place. To break the pact, one must face the entity and survive its trials. But beware, for it knows your deepest fears and will use them against you. Gap 2S. As the paranormal investigators pieced together the story, they realized the house was not just haunted. It was a prison for the entity and its bound victims. The laughter they heard was Eliza's, twisted by the entity's influence. Gap 3S. The legend of the Everwood house continues to grow, a testament to the horrors that lie within. Those who dare to enter do so at their own peril, for the entity is always watching, always waiting, and it will stop at nothing to claim new souls. Gap 2S. The house stands as a grim reminder of the consequences of desperate bargains and the eternal torment that follows. The whispers grow louder, the shadows more insistent, as the entity waits for the next unfortunate soul to step inside. Gap 3S. And so the cycle continues, each new visitor drawn by curiosity or bravado, only to become another chapter in the house's dark history. For once you enter, there is no escape. The entity sees all, knows all, and it will never let you go. Gap 3S. As the legend of the Everwood house unfolded, the paranormal investigators knew they had to put an end to the entity's reign of terror. They devised a plan to confront the entity and break the pact, once and for all. Armed with ancient rituals and a resolve to free the trapped souls, they descended into the heart of the house, the cellar, where the entity's power was strongest. Gap 2S. The cellar was a labyrinth of darkness, the air thick with malevolence. Each step echoed with the cries of the damned, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. The investigators formed a circle, chanting the incantations that would summon and bind the entity. Gap 2S. Suddenly the temperature dropped, and the whispers grew deafening. The entity emerged, a grotesque amalgamation of shadow and despair. It towered over them, eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. The investigators stood their ground, their voices unwavering as they continued the ritual. Gap 3S. The entity thrashed and roared, the ground trembling beneath their feet. It projected visions of their deepest fears, trying to break their concentration, but they pressed on, their determination unyielding. With a final resounding chant, the entity was forced back, its form dissipating into the ether. The house fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. Gap 2S. But as the investigators began to breathe a sigh of relief, a chilling realization dawned upon them. The walls of the cellar began to close in, and the exit disappeared. The entity's laughter echoed, not from outside, but from within. They had not banished it, they had only made it stronger. The pact was never meant to be broken. Gap 3S. The investigators were now part of the house, their souls bound to its cursed walls. Their voices joined the chorus of whispers, warning future visitors of the fate that awaited them. The Everwood house, now more powerful than ever, continued to stand as a beacon for the curious and the brave. Gap 2S. And so the cycle continues, each new visitor drawn by curiosity or bravado, only to become another chapter in the house's dark history. For once you enter, there is no escape. The entity sees all, knows all, and it will never let you go. Gap 3S. The house remains, an eternal vigil, ever hungry for the next soul to claim. Gap 3S. Do you dare to enter? Gap 3S. The choice is yours, but remember, some doors are best left unopened. Gap 5S. Please like and subscribe for more chilling tales.